Two. Mm-mm. I mean, we gotta play a game. Yeah. Uno it. He's technically on Brendan's account. I hear that. Oh, what? That was a collide of sounds. All right. I'm in. Mm-hmm. I'm not surprised. It's Ubisoft. I have no idea. Not the time. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, the luck of the draw. Oh, oh, oh. I count the spider webs. Psych. 2 sounds good. And oh, it wouldn't have mattered. Are you sure you want to quit? Yes. Ready to read? All right. Do you want to? You want to do a Bible project first?
Gospel according to Mark. It's one of the first accounts of
Man, their like Bible project videos are always like so much lower volume wise.
the life of Jesus, and our earliest historical traditions link this book to a Christian scribe named Mark, or John Mark. He was a co-worker with Paul and a close partner with Peter. And in fact, an ancient church historian named Papias, he recalls that Mark had collected all of the eyewitness accounts and memories of Peter and then shaped them into this account. But Mark didn't just randomly throw the pieces together. He's carefully designed this story of Jesus. In the first line of the book, Mark makes this claim about Jesus. It's the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Now, what's interesting is that this is the only time Mark is going to tell you what he thinks. For the rest of the book, he's going to influence you by simply putting Jesus' actions and words in front of you and showing you how other people react to him. Now, Mark's designed the story of Jesus as a drama with 3 acts. The first one set in Galilee, the third one is set in Jerusalem, and the second act shows Jesus on the way from one place to the other. And each of the acts focuses on a repeated theme. So in Act 1, everybody's blown away by Jesus, and they're wondering, who is this Jesus? In Act 2, it's the disciples who are struggling to understand what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. And then in Act 3, we watch the surprising paradox of how Jesus becomes the Messianic king. Let's just dive in and you'll see how it unfolds. After the opening line, Mark begins with a quotation from the ancient prophets Isaiah and Malachi, who said that God would send a messenger to Israel to prepare them for when God would show up himself to rescue his people and become their king. And Mark introduces John the Baptist as that messenger, and then right when you expect God to show up personally, Mark introduces Jesus. And as he comes onto the scene, the heavens open, God's Spirit descends on Jesus, and God says, "You are my beloved Son." After this, Mark places in front of us a summary of Jesus' core message. He went about Galilee announcing the good news that God's kingdom has come near. Jesus is carrying forward the story from the Old Testament scriptures about God's rescue operation for his world. Through Jesus, God is restoring his reign over the world by confronting and defeating evil and its hold on people's lives, and then by inviting them to live under his reign by following Jesus. From here, Mark's given us a big block of stories showing us Jesus' power as he brings God's kingdom. He goes about healing people whose bodies are sick or broken or under the oppression of dark spiritual powers. And Jesus even does something that for Jewish people only God has the right to do. He forgives people's sins. And Jesus' actions here produce lots of different responses. So some people follow him and become his disciples. Other people don't know what to think, and still others reject him completely, especially Israel's leaders who accuse him of blaspheming God and being empowered by evil. But Jesus isn't surprised by these responses. In fact, he draws attention to it. In chapter 4, Mark has collected many of Jesus' parables about the hidden, mysterious nature of God's kingdom. And Jesus says that his message is like seed falling on different types of soil. Some are receptive, some are not. Or it's like a mustard seed that's very tiny. It seems insignificant, but then it grows huge and surprises everyone. Jesus' point is that he really is the Messiah, bringing God's kingdom, but it doesn't look like what anybody expected. And And this growing confusion about Jesus among the crowds is connected to a key idea Mark emphasizes at the end of Act 1, that even among Jesus' disciples there's confusion. Even they are struggling to grasp who Jesus really is, and that brings us to Act 2. It begins with a crucial conversation. Jesus takes the disciples aside and he asks, "Who do you all say that I am?" And Peter speaks up, saying, "You're the Messiah." But it becomes clear that for Peter, this means that Jesus is a victorious military king from the line of David who will rescue Israel from the Romans. But for Jesus to be the Messiah means that he's the suffering servant king of Isaiah 53, who will bring God's rule by giving up his life in Jerusalem. And the disciples, they don't get it. They think following King Jesus is going to mean fame and status and importance, and Jesus makes it clear that following him is actually like dying, like carrying your own cross. It means rejecting violence and pride and selfishness and giving one's life out for others in acts of service and love. He has the same conversation with them 2 more times, and it all culminates in Jesus' important statement that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to become a servant and give his life as a ransom for many. The disciples still don't get it. They respond in confusion and fear. And so here in Act 2, Mark has placed another key story that echoes the book's introduction. Jesus takes 3 of his disciples up to a mountain, and he's suddenly transformed. He's radiating with light and glory, and a cloud envelops them. Now, this is just like the glory of the God of Israel that showed up long ago on Mount Sinai. And then the 2 prophets who stood in God's presence on Mount Sinai, Moses and Elijah, they appear next to Jesus as God announces again, "This is my beloved Son." Now, by placing this story in the middle of all these conversations in Act 2, Mark is making an astounding claim that Jesus, God's Son, is the physical embodiment of God's own glory. And in Jesus, the glorious God of Israel is going to become king by suffering and dying for the sins of his own people. It's a puzzling claim that confuses and scares the disciples as they leave the mountain. Which brings us to Act 3. Jesus makes a very public royal entry into Jerusalem for Passover. People are hailing him as the Messiah. Then he enters into the temple courtyard and he asserts his royal authority by running out the thieves and crooks and stopping the sacrificial system. Then this kicks off a whole week of Jesus debating and confronting the leaders of Israel, condemning their hypocrisy, and so they set in motion a plan to have him killed. And Jesus warns his disciples, predicting that Jerusalem and its temple will be destroyed within a generation, and his disciples will be persecuted just like him, until he returns one day to bring God's kingdom fully over the world. And it all leads up to the final night. Jesus has his last Passover meal with the disciples, a symbolic meal that told the story of Israel's liberation from slavery through the death of the Passover lamb. And Jesus takes these symbols and he gives them new meaning. They point to the liberation from sin and death that will happen through the death of the suffering servant Messiah. From here, the story rushes forward to Jesus' arrest, his trial before Israel's priests and the Roman governor Pilate, all resulting in Jesus' crucifixion. And it culminates in a key scene that matches the important scenes from Acts 1 and 2, except this time it's darkness that descends, not a cloud. And instead of the divine voice from heaven, it's Jesus' voice crying out before he dies. And then most surprising is that it's a Roman soldier who sees Jesus die, who grasps and then announces who Jesus is. This man was the Son of God. He's the first person in the story to recognize the story's shocking claim about Jesus' identity, that it's the crucified Son of God who's the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, who died for his friends and for his enemies. After this, Jesus' body is placed in a tomb, and on the first day of the new week, 2 women from his disciples come to the tomb, and they discover that the tomb is empty, the stone's rolled away, and an angelic man informs them that Jesus isn't here, that he's risen from the dead. And so he orders them to go and tell this good news to the other disciples, that Jesus is alive, that he'll meet them back up in Galilee. And the women, they're freaked out. Mark says that they fled from the tomb in terror, telling no one, for they were afraid. And that's how the book ends, with Jesus' disciples showing the same kind of fear and confusion that concluded Acts 2 and 1. Now, if you look in your Bible, you'll see that the Gospel of Mark has more to its ending. where Jesus appears, he speaks to his disciples, but there's also a note there telling you that that ending is not part of the original book, that it's only found in later, less reliable manuscripts. Now, it's possible that the original ending got lost, or that Mark actually never finished writing his account, but it's more likely that this abrupt ending is intentional to make a point. The entire story has focused on the shocking claim that puzzled Jesus' disciples from beginning to end, that it's the suffering, crucified, and risen Jesus who's the Messiah, the Son of God, that God's love and upside-down kingdom were revealed as Jesus died for the sins of the world. And so this story ends without closure, and it forces you, the reader, to grapple with this very strange and scandalous claim about Jesus. And are you going to run away like the disciples? Or are you going to recognize Jesus as your king and go and tell the good news? And only you can answer that question. And that's what the Gospel of Mark is all about.
Yeah. All right. Takeaways. Yeah, it's definitely a different point of view. Yeah, but also Mark is like showing that people be confused. These people, yeah, because here they are, like expecting him. Some of them expecting to be the Messiah who will. And so it's crazy is the person that they're expecting to be boomed is the one who declares at the end, like the Roman centurion, like he's like, "Whoa, that is the Son of God! Holy smoke!" Yep, that's gosh darn crazy biscuits. And so it has this abrupt ending though, because from all this you have confusion, confusion, confusion. And these confusions work in that same pattern. And so you see the beautiful literary work that Mark is stringing together here. All right, friend, what's your question? You watch for a bit though. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's still watching. Is the Jesus, you're healing for amazing. Thank you again that we can enjoy good weather, good food, good bread, good butter, good drinks. We live in the moment that we live in just in a time and moment where a lot of our actions are just goes towards working around pleasures. We generally speaking, like at least in my current group, we don't have to wonder where bread is coming, where food is coming. Like we don't have to be worried about life or death. May we recognize where we're at and just be thankful for what you've done. And in that thankfulness, we love and serve the other, like how you have loved and served us unto death. Thank you, King Jesus, for not using your power to gobble smack everyone. Thank you that you were this gentle and meek. Nothing compares to your gentleness and how you still operate in truth in that gentleness, which is bonkers. You're not so gentle where you're a pushover, but yet you're so gentle that you help us confused animals who just need your wisdom. We're like kids, we need your wisdom. So please reveal it. For your awesome and good. Amen. 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 1 through 24. The personal and the political. Elijah the Tishbite from the settlers in Gilead said to Ahab, as Yahweh lives, the God of Israel, before whom I stand and attend during these years, there be no dew or rain except at the word from my mouth. Oh, we're in 2 Kings. I'm a silly goose. Like, this looks familiar. All right. So we did the cloak. Tale 2 woman. This is where we're at. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 to 44. A tale of 2 women. Now a certain woman among the wives of the disciples of the prophets cried out to Elijah, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you yourself know that your servant was someone who revered Yahweh, and a creditor is coming to take my 2 children for himself as servants. Elijah said to her, what am I to do for you? Tell me what you have in the house. She said, your servant has nothing at all in the house except a jug of oil. He said, go and ask for containers for yourselves from outside, from all your neighbors, empty containers. Don't make it a few. Come in, shut the door behind you and your children, and pour oil into all these containers. Remove each full one. She went from him and shut the door behind her and her children. People were bringing containers to her, and she was pouring. When the containers were full, she said to her son, bring me another container. But he said to her, there isn't another container, and the oil stopped. She came and told the man of God. He said, go and sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your children can live on what is left. One day Elisha traveled to Shunem. An important woman was there, and she pressed him to eat. And whenever he traveled, he would stop over there to eat. So she said to her husband, now I recognize that it is a holy man of God who travels to us all the time. Let's make him a little walled room and on the roof, and put a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lamp. When he comes to us, he can stop over there. One day he came there and stopped over in the room on the roof and lay down there. And said to Gehazi, his boy, call the Shunammite woman. He said, at this season next year you are going to be holding a son. She said, don't, my lord, man of God, don't deceive your servant. But the woman conceived and had a son at this season the next year, as Elijah declared to her. The child grew up, but one day he went out to his father to the reapers, and said to his father, my head, my head. He said to a boy, carry him to his mother. He carried him and took him to his mother, and he sat on her lap until noon and died. She set out and came to the man of God on Mount Carmel. She said, did I ask for a son for my Lord? Didn't I say, don't encourage me? Elisha came to the house, and there the boy was dead, laid on his bed. He went in and shut the door behind the 2 of them and pleaded with Yahweh. He climbed up and lay on the child, put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, his hands on his hands, as he crouched over him. The child's flesh warmed up. He returned and went into the house here and there. Then climbed up and crouched over him, and the boy sneezed 7 times. Then the boy opened his eyes. Elijah called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite woman. He called her and she came to him. He said, "Pick up your son." Verse 37 to 44 close off the story and tell two more stories of wonders performed by Elisha. So here's a couple more excerpts of prophecies being done with Elisha. Not prophecies, miracles. And prophecies, I guess, yeah. It did say that you were going to have a son. Among my friends, lower this. That's better. Among my friends are a number of young couples who have been hoping to have children. It has never happened. Then they go in for medical examination of various kinds and for treatments of various kinds. One couple had eggs implanted, but they never stuck, and I think the couple have now become reconciled to never having children. In the case of another couple, a doctor decided that the wife needed a certain form of treatment and encouraged her to think that this might solve the problem. I imagine it was hard then to live with that encouragement. You don't know whether to believe the doctor, and maybe if you don't believe, it won't happen. You don't want the encouragement to be something that eventually leads to a deflation worse than the gloom you already felt. Then last year, this particular woman got pregnant, and you wonder whether this time will lead only to miscarriage. I wonder that. I didn't dare ask them whether they wonder that, but 2 weeks ago she had her baby. Maybe this Shumanite woman experienced a more profound discouragement than my first friend when she had the implants and they didn't work, or than my second friend might have experienced if she had never conceived or had miscarried. It looks as if this woman from Shunem had come to terms with not being able to have children, and she had directed her energy in other directions, like giving hospitality to a wandering prophet. Like many Old Testament stories, this story shows how women can be people of initiative and action. They're not confined to doing what their husbands say. Shunem is a village in the fertile plain in the center of Ephraim, not so far from Jezreel and thus below Mount Carmel, where Elisha has his base. As usual, the story assumes that the ground floor of a house comprises the regular family quarters and that the roof is the place for privacy or for doing something special. It is Elisha's appreciation of the woman's care for him that leads to his encouraging his servant to ask what he can do for her. She tells him she has everything she needs, and it is Gehazi who points out that she has no son and that her husband is old. The implication is not merely that they'll be unable to have children, but that she will be left on her own sooner rather than later. Who would then look after her? There is no, "Thus says the Lord," and no praying on Elisha's response. Elisha is the man of God. That is what that's what the woman calls him. The implication is that he has supernatural power. Now, it's quite possible to believe that someone has supernatural power, or just to recognize that God has the power to heal or give new life, but not to be able to imagine that this power will be exercised on one's personal behalf. It's the kind of thing that happens to other people, not to me, we think. And most of the time we are right. Most childless couples do not have the experience that comes to this couple. Yet somehow the fact that some couples do have this experience can be an encouragement to the majority who don't. The fact that the woman has a hard time believing what Elijah says places no obstacle to its coming true. What God does isn't necessarily dependent on our faith, but the fulfillment of Elisha's promise is only half the story. Maybe it is sunstroke that overcomes the boy out in the fields in the heat of harvest time. Again, his mother is the one who exercised initiative. Ignoring her husband's objections to her hastening to Elisha's base on Mount Carmel. What if he's not there? He's here all right. And he's surprised not by what has happened to the boy, but by the fact that Yahweh has hidden it from him and not told him. Just because you're a man of God with supernatural insight and supernatural power doesn't mean you can see and do everything. Elisha attempts to send Gehazi off to see what can be done for the boy, but the woman will not be fobbed off by that action, so Elisha follows. The process whereby the boy is resuscitated again presupposes that Elisha's very person contains mysterious power. Life can flow from him to the boy. Stories about Jesus using spit and mud and healing a blind man and needing to try more than once in one case will parallel these stories about Elisha. The last story in the chapter concerns Elisha miraculously feeding 100 people with a relatively small number of loaves. It too will thereby eventually show how Jesus exercised a ministry like Elisha. One can produce generalizations from the stories about the way healing works. One simply stands and astonished and hopeful before what God sometimes does. The story about the widow of the one of the disciples of the prophets illustrates some overlapping dynamics. Jesus points out that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's day. And the situation hasn't changed in Jesus' own day. There are no social security or widow's benefits. It is your extended family and your neighbors who are supposed to help you through when you're in difficulties. But the presupposition of the story may be that the whole community is in difficulty. You aren't necessarily protected from such trouble by the fact that your husband was a person who was truly devoted to God and involved in ministry. Evidently, a woman or her husband, before he died, had taken out a loan in the hope that the situation would improve. Maybe they'll get a decent harvest and be able to pay the loan back. It hasn't happened. The collateral on the loan would then be that the children's labor will pay back the loan. This doesn't mean they'll be slaves. And if the system worked in accordance with the Torah, they'll be free again after a while. But the arrangement wouldn't be much fun for mother or children. Because we don't have miraculous experiences like those of these two women, it's tempting for us to assume these are just stories. And there is no way of establishing whether or not this is so. Perhaps it makes little difference if they relate things that happened. If they relate things that happened, such things are unlikely to happen for us. Whatever is the case, they are present in Scripture and invite us to wonder at God's capacity to make extraordinary things happen, and also be open to being God's agents and reaching out in some way to women who can't have children or lose their children or lose their husbands. So here we're reading about miracles. And there's a chance of miracles happening today. The goal is hold your hands open. And let's be encouraged by the moments they do happen. And if they don't happen, then let's look for hope in what God has done and hope he does. All right, friend, we can start. Are you doing Elden Ring proper? Mm-hmm. Did you have to restart your computer? You know how like this side I have no icons and this side I do? Maybe you're thinking it's like two monitors connected to each other. I don't know. That's just a guess. All right, turn it down a little bit, my friend. It felt pretty loud, but it could be where the speakers are positioned. Mm. is rosemary basil. Rosemary. It's like surprisingly sweet. It sorry. It reminds me of the sweetness reminds me of banana bread with, not banana, raisin bread without the raisins. When I take a bite, it reminds me of the sweetness of raisin bread. I feel like that'll make, that's what I was thinking. It has like, this will make a good cheese. Yeah, go ahead, friend. take the damage. Is 3. It's not so much throwaway, I just needed it to survive the match. That is, I'm done with this mission now. holy stuff. Oh. No. Kind of fine. And the lady who does the research. Hmm. Someone else I can give the sparks to. It. All the sparks. I have a bunch of stuff. Awesome. Mhm. Mhm. Oh no. I just level up twice for some reason at the very beginning. No, the red candle is just I have to beat the game with it, but it has some really mean effects. No. Maybe good if I got a lot of curses on me because it destroys everything when it leaves. No, well, it can never be in the same place twice. So I'm trying to use the middle spots first, because as I get more items, it's going to be harder. Mm-hmm. It's the same damage. So this one does just 10. I have to activate something near it to reuse it again, but it's just flat out better than a wooden sword. The only thing about the wooden sword, the only reason I hold on to it is because there is something to upgrade with it. That's the hot pot. I'm only holding on damage because it's part of our research. Such a good armor piece. Gain some little. I won't say another food. Gotta limit yourself. You know, when you look in the mirror, you gotta make sure you like who you. Has the smell of the Caesars be too strong? What's up? King Jesus, that thank you for that we could take this time, enjoy delicious food like pizza, enjoy a good time together, enjoy exploring even really delicious bread. We have found that we like the tomato basil bread. You are the great giver. You have created us. You could have just made us automatons where we're all about worshiping you, but you allow us to enjoy the fruit of your creation. So we thank you. As we read the writings of the ancients, please reveal to us their wisdom. Amen. Yeah? Distracting? Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was someone important to his lord and highly regarded, because through him Yahweh had given deliverance to Aram. But the man was a powerful warrior with a skin disorder. The Arameans had gone out raiding and had captured from Israel a little girl who waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master were in the presence of the prophet in Samaria, then he would remove his disorder from him." Naaman went and told his master, "The girl from Israel has spoken such and such," and the king of Aram said, "Get yourself off and go, and I'll send a letter to the king of Israel." So he went, took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 suits of clothes, and brought the letter to the king of Israel. "Now when this letter comes to you, write, I have sent my servant Naaman to you, so you may remove his skin disorder from him." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill or make alive, that this man is saying to me to remove a skin disorder from someone? Because surely you can recognize and see that he is seeking a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? He should come to me, so he may recognize that there is a prophet in Israel." So, remember how we talked about how kings in this time saw themselves as the son of gods, like literally like gods in flesh. Kings saw himself as this, and so they were used to prophets throw some money at them and they'll go to do some incantation and you be healed. And this is when the king just tore his clothes, because this is not how a relationship with Yahweh works. You can't throw some money and get some. Naaman came with his horses and charioteers and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent aid to say, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your skin will come back for you and be clean." So even Elisha, so you're seeing here, he's like making them to recognize the power of Yahweh. And here he comes on, he's the king's aide. So he is like big name. But then Elisha just like doesn't even meet him. He just sends his servants. "Go tell him, wash 8 times in the Jordan, you be good. 7 times. Go wash 7 times in the Jordan, you be good." And so, you think he's going to be like, he's an important person? It'd be like if we hear the president's coming here and I have Bailey answer him. And like, "Bailey, answer the president." Like, wouldn't that be weird? Naaman was furious and went off. He said, "Well, I said to myself, he will definitely come out and stand and call on the name of Yahweh, his God, and wave his hand at the place to remove the disorder. Aren't Armanah and Pharpar, the rivers in Damascus, better than all the water in Israel? Couldn't I wash them and be clean?" So he turned and went off in a rage. But his staff came forward and spoke to him. They said, "Father, had the prophet spoken to you of a big thing, wouldn't you do it? How much more when he said to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times in accordance with the word of the man of God. And his skin came back like a little boy's, and it was clean. He returned to the man of God, he and all his retinue? Retinu? Retinu.
Retinue.
Retinue. He returned to the man of God. So he finally listened. He was like, I'm being important. Okay, fine. I will go wash in the Jordan. So he turned, and he did, and he got healed. He returned to the man of God. He and all his retinue came and stood in front of him and said, Right, I acknowledge there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. So now do accept a gift from your servant. He said, As Yahweh lives, before whom I stand in attendance, I will not. Naaman pressed him to, but refused. Naaman said, May there not then be given to your servant 2 mules load of earth, because your servant will no longer make a burnt offering or a sacrifice to any other god but Yahweh? With regard to this matter, may Yahweh pardon your servant when my master goes into Rimnah's house to bow down there, and he leans on my arm so I have to bow down there in Rimnah's house. When I bow down in Rimnah's house, may Yahweh pardon your servant in this matter. He said to him, Go and be well. 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 19b to chapter 6, verse 7, with how Gehazi tells Naaman that Elisha has changed his mind about the gift, and Elisha declares that his disorder will come on Gehazi. They then tell of another of Elisha's trivial miracles. Yesterday was the fourth. Yesterday was the fourth Sunday of the month, and as usual on that Sunday, we didn't have a proper sermon. The rector sat on a chair and invited the congregation to tell us what they heard God saying to us out of scripture readings. It's only a little church, so this is practicable, as it would not be in a big church. The philosophy of that practice is the awareness that ordinary people are likely to show as much spiritual insight as rectors or theology professors. I tried to keep quiet during the time of sharing, though I did not succeed yesterday. One or two of the people who often make contributions to the discussions are also people who from time to time circulate encouraging and thought-provoking emails around the congregation. The Naaman story illustrates how ordinary people sometimes see things that leaders can't see. Translations traditionally refer to Naaman's problem as leprosy, but that word has changed its meaning over the centuries and is now misleading. The Hebrew word doesn't denote a deformity that makes someone's limbs wither, but rather a skin ailment. While it did not mean people had to avoid contact with others, as this story shows, they did have to be worried about it. While you had the skin disorder, you could not go to the sanctuary to offer a sacrifice, and anyone who had close contact with you might catch the taboo that attached to you. So a person who wanted to go to the sanctuary will need to be wary of coming too close to you. Hence, Luke 17 speaks of some people with the skin ailment keeping their distance from Jesus. A plausible theory about why a skin ailment could be viewed thus is that it made your body look as if it were derogating in the way it does when we die. Compare the story about Miriam's ailment in Numbers 12. So the ailment was redolent of death, and death was incompatible with being with God. You couldn't go into God's presence when you looked like death. It wasn't possible to do anything about the skin disorder except hope that will go away. Except that this poor young girl who has been captured in a war knows someone who can do something about it. She could have been pardoned for thinking to herself, this Armenian general deserves this order and more for what he has done to us Israelites, and to me in particular, but instead she speaks up and tells her mistress about the prophet who could remove it. The king of Aram shows some insight in being willing to believe the girl, though the price he assumed he must pay suggests he has had some bad experiences with the Aramean health insurance system. But actually the problem is described as something like a disorder rather than as an illness. The story consistently talks about removing this disorder and about cleanness rather than about healing it, so that this is not a healing story. The Ephraimite king has less excuse for his clueless response. One can perhaps understand Naaman's attitude to Elisha, who doesn't even bother to come to the door to see the great general, but just sends one of his staff with some stupid-looking instructions. After all, Naaman knows how the exercise of spiritual gifts is supposed to work. And it's not by bathing in a muddy stream. It is again the ordinary guy, the members of his staff, who have the spiritual insights. They realize that one thing you can know about spiritual gifts is that you can never predict how they will work. There are no rules. God doesn't work by rules. While there may not be rules, there may be a rationale, though you may be able to see it only afterwards. It often puzzles us or even agonizes us why God heals some people and not others. Here Naaman gets a cleansing when there are lots of people with his disorder in Israel who just have to live with it. Naaman gets a cleansing because God is demonstrating that there is a prophet in Israel, that God is speaking and acting there. There is something significant about the Jordan River, even though it is no more impressive than the river in Damascus. It is in the land where the God of Israel is especially at work. Naaman does get in, thus comes to share the wisdom of ordinary people like the unnamed little girl and his unnamed staff. While the Old Testament story focuses mostly on God's work in Israel, it does from time to time remind its readers that God's working with Israel has all the nations as its broader concern. And a story like this is an example. Naaman comes to recognize there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Yet he can hardly stay in Canaan like a resident alien such as Ruth the Moabite or Uriah the Hittite. He has a job to go back to. He reminds us of the Middle Eastern sages who come to see Jesus and worship him yet then have to go back to their homeland. How can Naaman possibly do so? He has been to the Holy Land, the land where Yahweh is especially active, so he takes back enough Israelite soil for him to be able to stand on each day when he prays and offers sacrifices. Prays and offers sacrifice. It will be as if he is back in that Holy Land, and when he has to look as if he is worshiping the God of the Arameans, and in his heart he will be worshiping Yahweh. There are Muslims today who do this rather than cut themselves off from their community and risk their lives. In Luke 4, Jesus hints at a different significance in Elisha's cleansing in Naaman rather than the Israelite with his disorder. It is a kind of judgment on Israel itself. And this is one warning note in the story. Another is the tail piece about Gehazi, who could say he's just being practical. He seems to be Elisha's senior aide, and maybe he has a job of making the household finances work. But his action confuses the message that emerges from the action of the man of God and the God who stands behind him, and he pays a terrible price. All right, friend, we can start. What's up, CQ? Yes. I can help you with that. For that one. It's alright. I know you're testing something out, but it's 5 o'clock, so work on wrapping it up, my friend. That's game for me. Yes.